We've got some fresh new young talent doing some things that I know you haven't heard before.
1, 2, 3, listen.
Welcome to Finances, your home for all things financial, investment, money and lifestyle. Hosted and curated by the very talented team of certified financial planners at Burke Britton Financial Partners. All right, Ben, this week in Finances, last night we were going back and forwards with topics. It seems as though we keep coming back to a common theme, cost of living. That cost of living discussions led into, we're talking super now, we're talking class actions against the Reserve Bank governor.
It sort of smacks you in the face, doesn't it? I was, yesterday morning, I was thinking, what will we talk about this week? What will be our topic? And then everywhere I looked, it was this conversation about access to super.
I actually got asked the question in two of my appointments today about what's going on with super.
Yeah, everywhere you flick now, that's popping up. So it's good. Again, we probably haven't talked about super a lot. There's probably, today we'll touch on it, but probably talk about all the reasons of why or why not that might or might not be a good idea. Bit of personal take on it, but
maybe you and I, I'm not sure whether you and I will agree or disagree on some of the concepts around super. But I was flicking through Twitter for some topics last night, and I think it was pretty much like you said. It just smacked me in the face. Everything, I think it was trending. Should Australians be allowed to dip into their super in order to do things like buy a house? And that was on Q&A. Old mate Stan Grant talking about, I think Yelena Dokic was giving superannuation advice. I'm not sure whether
there was a funny ending to that video you sent me. I suppose the thing is, what that shows is that everyone has a thought on it. Everyone has some connection to super.
Or maybe let's start with why they're even talking about it. Why are they talking about people actually diving into super to buy a house?
I suppose even maybe before them buying a house, it's actually just people are struggling so much at the moment just to pay their bills and put a roof over their head, whether that be rent or bills, etc., that there's a feeling that they might need to lean on their super in a, I suppose, hardship manner would be probably the term that they were using, just to meet their ongoing needs for their cost of living, just their basic standard of living. So, that's always been a thing, that you can access super for hardship, but what hardship has been defined as from super perspective in the past is much different to what people would be claiming as hardship in these circumstances. So to give a real general definition of that, in the past, hardship, you would need to have been on Centrelink unemployed for 6 months, and you need to have a bill that you cannot physically pay in any other way, that you could then access a portion of your super, not a super big amount.
And I believe it was capped at like $10,000.
I think 10 grand was the max, so most of the time I've seen it ever used was a couple of grand here or there. And I think that's proper hardship. Like, there's proper hardship times you literally cannot pay a bill, you're seeking work, not finding it, etc., etc. So it's probably, again, it's interesting if you just think about it, like what hardship means versus what hardship means in the conversation of today. Whereas
is the definition of hardship, I'm unable to get together a deposit for my first home?
Or is it, it would be brutal. You don't know everyone's circumstance, but, maybe they're still doing some level of discretionary spending, but they can't afford to pay their bills. Maybe. I don't know. Who knows? It's very case by case. You can't really assume. I think, broadly speaking, everyone is feeling it in some way, aren't they? So there's definitely that is real. The issue being, that's sort of what they want us to feel. Like, they want the RBA, they want us to stop spending money to stop inflation going up. So if we started releasing money from super and let people
continue to spend,
does it just blow this bubble up even bigger? And that's just the economic side of it. But without removing the emotion from it, immediately you go, geez, if they let us start pulling our super out to pay bills, where else does it go? Where does it stop? And what does it do for consumables without even looking at the property market? You inflate people's bank account and their pocket and their spending budget for a home. You tell me what that does.
Yeah, well, from a macro point of view, if you make, it's like when there's easy access to money, when interest rates were very low, people could get access to more capital, they could borrow more. That pushed up property prices. So if we're worried about inflating property prices and making property affordable for people, one of the ways that you continue to push property prices up is give people access to additional funds that they didn't have otherwise to buy a property that they couldn't previously afford. To me, it's a bit backwards. And maybe if you step all the way back to the original intent of super, and I'm going to age myself here, but I mean, superannuation in Australia is, we're fairly well renowned worldwide for our superannuation system. It was brought in with compulsory super guarantee obligations where the employer pays a percentage on top of the salary into a superannuation policy with the view that, and super comes under a mandate, which is that it has a sole purpose. So the sole purpose of superannuation is for retirement benefits.
I think that term, and I always come back to that, this, what they call it, the sole purpose test. So when you test something, you go, all right, if I did this, is my super, is it solely based for retirement? If it fails that test, then no. So as a loose example, someone comes in and needs some advice around doing investing outside of their super fund, and they go, oh, can you charge my super fund for that advice? No, because the sole purpose of super is to fund your retirement. So you're basically accessing it to fund something that's not, in relation to it directly in a super situation.
Yep.
It gets messy. But what they're saying is super is for retirement. If you start blurring that line, which I think we've done, it's already happened because we let people access it through COVID. Now that as it's been stated, that was, a 1 in 100 year event sort of thing. So they let that happen. But then we muddied the waters with like a first home super saver scheme, which doesn't really do a lot, just a long term that was probably a political ploy. Again, just made super seem a bit more accessible.
Yeah, I think muddying those expectations around what super is and what it's for has been a real issue. Like, if anything, like superannuation, if I try and explain it in simplest term, there's an incentive to put money into super, and that is that you can potentially claim a tax deduction to contribute in, and the money that you hold in there is concessionally taxed, meaning it's not taxed at your marginal tax rate. The trade-off is you can't touch it till you're 60.
Is it the simplest form of deferred reward?
Well, you're right. It's probably the ultimate in deferred reward in that there's some restrictions around it that force you. It's almost like, I think maybe we talked about this on one of our cash flow podcasts, in that ideally you want to restrict your ability to access those funds if you have a purpose for them. And that's what retirement superannuation sole purpose actually is. You're restricted in your ability to access it. The incentive is that you get some tax advantage on the way in, and the funds grow in a tax advantageous environment. And the incentive from the government, and so for Bob Hawke and Paul Keating, who brought in compulsory super whenever it was in the 80s, it was a very long-term view to say we know we've got an ageing population, and we would like to have more people not reliant on an age pension. Therefore, how do we do it? They actually pushed that burden back onto employers and said you will now you have a mandatory contribution you have to make. All of those are really good things, and there has for a long time been a lot of confidence in the superannuation system. People go, okay, well, these are the rules. We can't access it. This is the tax advantage. These are the benefits, and I'm confident that those rules won't change, and I won't find out later that maybe my benefits are taxed or in a different way. Or
I think the one that really stung people was sliding back the age you can access it. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably everyone's ultimate fear is, okay, I put it away based upon planning to retire at 60 as it stands at the moment, but will they slide that back that I can't access until later?
Yeah, and that I can't actually remember whether the sliding scale from what was preservation age was 55 when they pushed it back to 60. I can't actually recall whether or not that happened.
It's just finished.
No, I can't remember whether that happened midstream, whether it was always 55 and then they introduced the sliding scale to 60. I'd have to double check that. Yeah. But you're right. The bottom line is that to give confidence in the superannuation system, if the government wants people to fund their own retirement, you've got to leave super alone and don't muddy the waters with things like access for accessing for a home or.
I suppose the flip side, and this is
This is the
the
dichotomy.
counter argument to it is there's two things: does it benefit you more long term to let people access it and buy a home early in their life? And it's my money. Why can you tell me what to do with it? That's the two. If you read the themes of the threads that are out there, they're probably the 2 points. So, I haven't seen the research on the first one to really give a.
My immediate view on the first one, I think it was someone asked a similar question in that Q&A episode, which we'll put in the show notes so people can listen to it, was that looking historically, property prices always go up. So, of course, you'd be better off to allow someone to take their money from super, put it in property, and they'll be better off. A past history of performance isn't a reliable indicator of future performance. We don't know what is going to happen. In all likelihood, property prices may take a dive at some point. So to say that it's a guarantee that taking money out and putting it into property is going to see someone better off when they reach retirement is based upon a number of assumptions that we can't be certain of.
It's a dangerous game. Well, that was my immediate thought. It's dangerous if we start to do that, because you could apply that in so many different ways. And how many different ways can you run the numbers? And maybe it's correct for some people. But what's the long-term impact of that? Let's just say 10, 20 grand not being in there for 35 years, compounding, growing. It's still an asset. Maybe it could have been pulled out at the end and paid for a property. Who knows? It's a dangerous game when you start pulling it, those sort of comparison points, I think.
What was the second part of your question?
The other part was, it's my money. Now, this one, in a perfect world, you'd go apply for a job and they'd say, and you can get 10.5% extra. We can put that through to your super fund, or we can give it to you as an extra part of your salary. What would you like to do? How many people would say, I'll park that away for later?
That's why it's mandated.
That's why it's mandated, because people have no self-control.
Yeah.
And they'll go, I'll invest it. I'll invest it myself. I'll pay a bit more tax on it, but I'll invest it, and then I control what I do. There'll be a small percentage that would do that, but there'd be a massive portion of people who would just blow it.
Well, I think that question about it's my money, I should be able to do whatever the hell I want with it, what it probably suggests is that people who are asking that question don't understand what super is, why it was put in place, and what the benefits of it are long term. So if this goes back to education, this goes back to actually telling people early, like kids at the moment, like if they see superannuation as like someone wanting to buy their first house in their mid-20s, if they've had nothing to do with super, they don't know what super is, they see $10,000 in this bank account, in inverted commas, that's got their name on it, that they should be able to access. They need 10 grand to put in as a deposit on their home. My money, why can't I access it? Whereas if this is almost going back to the origin of these issues, if you actually inform people early about the benefits of, the merits of, why it's important, then people understand it. They realise that, there's a sole purpose and there's restrictions for a reason. And there's a trade-off. Again, when it comes to your own money, not the compulsory super guarantee that the employer puts in, you do have a choice. You don't have to put it in. But if you want to get the advantage of a tax deduction and a tax concession, you can. So, there's a trade-off with everything in life. And I suppose my view on super, and we've been in super, super's been sort of the cornerstone of what we've done in advice for 20 odd years. It's leave it alone. Like there already has been, like I've heard, like there's lots and lots of discussion around super at the moment in the media. One of it is, we should tax it more. We should actually create an additional tax because the government needs more revenue. Well, why does the government need more revenue? Because they've spent money that they didn't have, and that's caused inflation. Superannuation, in my mind, can't be that bucket of tax revenue generation for the government. There's tax rates that are set in stone. We should largely leave them alone. There's already been, over the course of the last decade, significant changes. Like the fat cats in super, for the longest time, those people older than 60 could have an unlimited amount in super and have it tax-free.
I think I went to a conference a few years ago and they sort of quoted some of the biggest funds out there.
$80-100 million.
Yeah, $80 to $100 million in super now.
All in tax-free super pension. That means no income tax, no capital gains tax, and you could take money out and pay no tax.
Yeah, so that was where it was. And then in the space of the last 10 years now, maybe there's, in the new world, let's just loosely say, so $3.5 million might be
as a couple.
The top end of a self-made super fund sort of situation.
Yeah,
probably
so
loosely.
As a couple, you can have $3.5 million in a tax-free environment and pay no income tax, no capital gains tax, and the income you take from it will be tax-free. That's money that you've accumulated over your working life. Now, to me, that person is that person going to be on Centrelink benefits? No. Are they going to be reliant on government support? Probably not. They've self-funded their own retirement. They've got a chunk of money that they've put away and committed not to touching until they were older than 60.
They've also paid a heap of tax on that along the way, because when it goes in, if you do claim it as a deduction, they take 15%. All through the years of it generating its own income while you're working, it still pays it on income another 15%. So, you're paying tens of thousands of dollars annually in tax while that grows still. So it's not that it's a complete free ride for those funds either. Like, it's still paying a heap of tax along the way. And ultimately, if a lot of people don't make good decisions with their estate planning at the end of their life, the government takes another chunk of it on the way out as well when people pass. And that, again, we don't want to go. Don't have to go down that rabbit hole. But you basically, that goes into super, it pays a bit of tax.
When
it
it's
earns
in super,
in there,
it pays tax. When you die, it goes to non-dependents, pays tax.
So it's getting taxed all along the way. So if you, I feel personally at this point in time, it's probably fair where it gets taxed along the way. Like it's still an incentive enough to warrant putting the money in there, letting it grow and accumulate. But if you start to then lift one of those, whether it's the contribution tax or the tax on earnings inside the fund or the tax on the way out, we're going to get to a point where people lose confidence and you lose a bit of the benefit quickly.
So if people lose confidence in super,
they don't use it.
They don't contribute to super. If they don't contribute to super, what potentially do they do with their money?
Well, they spend it.
Spend it?
Yeah.
Yep.
And then ultimately, they get to the end of their work life and which the other part of it is their work life ends up being probably a bit longer because they've got to get through to a mandated age of maybe an age pension, which is currently 67, and there'd be pretty much no doubt that at some point that will slide to 70 probably.
Yep.
So they get to 70 and then they apply for a payment that they don't have any control over the rules, regulations, income or asset thresholds on. And then they use that to supplement their income needs. And it's not much. It's sustenance.
And in doing that, we've created what is likely an unfunded burden for the government that has to fund an ageing population that previously could have funded their own retirement because they got some incentives along the way. Now they're almost entirely reliant on the government and the age pension, and with an ageing population, the pressure that puts on the government means that, like, how do we pay for government pensions?
Yeah, with taxation dollars from everywhere else. So
yeah,
I think it's bizarre in terms of when I look at it from like the two different, say the Liberal and Labor Party or Liberal National, they've both got two sort of contradictory views on this as well, which I find really fascinating. Like you've got, I think this is, again, correct me if you've read this differently, but the Labor Party saying, no, we don't think people should get access to it, but we want to tax them a bit more on it, what's in there. Then the Liberal National saying we want to be able to let people get money out so they can buy a home, which is a bit backwards to what they've probably... And then they're going to, that then creates an unfunded retirement in the future. So both those points are probably... Again, they're really conflicting. It probably feels like they're...
It's also very, like we said it right at the start, it's very short-sighted, but that's what happens with politics. Like it's a very political cycle oriented and trying to cater to your base. what we don't do very well in politics or in our personal lives is think about time and deferred reward. And with all of the stuff that we talk about, I know we bang on it about a lot, but even the ability to afford a home, your first home, your kids to afford their first home, giving them the tools to take personal responsibility. And like if you can't put together enough money to buy a house, you actually have to make some sacrifices. You've actually got to have a look around. And I know the cost of living has gone up. We know that that interest rates have gone up. But that is what it is. It is what it is. Sometimes you do actually need to take some personal steps rather than say we should take a class action against the Reserve Bank governor, or rather than saying I should dip into my super with the view that I don't really care about what happens in the future. Taking personal responsibility and, looking after your own backyard first rather than...
This is probably just reflective of society at this point in time. There's a bit of that victim mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think that what they said in terms of the RBA and saying rates will not go up was not the correct thing to say, but at the same time... I don't know whether
he actually said...
Yeah, let's say he did say that. Let's say he did say they won't go up for 2 years.
I think people in
2 years is 2 years. What was going to happen after that?
Yeah, the writing was on the wall. Like interest rates are going to go up at some point.
Yeah.
So
let's say that they didn't go up for 2 years. Everyone's living in fantasy land for the 2 years now. Inflation's at 10, 12%. And then we have to hike rates rapidly after that 2 year period. It would be worse.
Yeah, so rather than basing your decisions on an unknown of someone that you don't even know who you see on the telly, you need to take personal responsibility and say, what can I actually afford now? If rates did go up by 2-3%, what sort of impact would that have on me? It doesn't matter whether it's in 2 years or it's in 6 months. Again, it's very easy to actually point fingers and blame other people rather than actually say, oh shit, I probably should have done a better job myself of getting some support, getting some advice, working out whether I can afford what I'm about to get myself into. And sure, there are horror stories out there with people that are just stuck. I think they're in mortgage prison. The ones that are just stuck and can't refinance, have had due to life circumstances an arrangement that they can't get out of, and that's not great. It's a bad situation, but I think to change circumstances back to the point around superannuation and getting access, for something other than hardship or getting access to pay your property off, I think that is fraught with danger and also a very short-sighted view that I don't think is going to hold us in good stead in the future. So if it's me, I'm just leaving super alone. I'm giving people confidence that you can rest assured that the way it is today will largely be the way it is when you retire, and you have confidence to invest in there and fund your retirement that way.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are mechanisms to release super when it is genuinely required. So you've got hardship from a financial perspective, but you've also got medical emergency as well. If there's the death or disability of the member,
terminal illness.
So you've got all of these. There are mechanisms there, and that's sort of what it's built for. Is okay, you can get it, but it's got to be life or death, basically. And there's a few compassionate grounds ones as well. So that's in
the
place.
Compassionate ground ones. There's like
it's interesting because you can
IVF.
I was going to say you can apply for IVF. That's sort of the big one in the last few years. Has been probably the biggest one people have used it for. Which again, I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who probably disagree with that. Which personally, I if that's what they choose to do, then that's what they choose to do. Again, this is where it gets very blurry between buying a house, starting a family, IVF. Like all these things are really difficult. Someone's made these decisions to legislate it like that. I think that there's probably been a crackdown on some of the compassionate grounds ones as well. But it's a murky waters.
I think it can be one of those slippery slope scenarios where under the guise of caring for people and wanting to do the right thing for people, you start to give them it just inches forward a little bit by a little bit by a little bit, and Compassionate Grounds turns into, accessing it for buying a new car because I need a vehicle to get to work, so I should have a car.
I had someone call about
that's I use
7 or 8 years ago and try and do that. You probably had the same thing before.
Yeah,
as
I can
well.
think
It
of
used to be.
so many examples of people, and you don't knock people for asking that question. Hey, can I access my super for X, Y, or Z?
I found it difficult because they were trying to do that to get a vehicle to get to work, to get themselves back on track.
Yeah.
And that was, again, this is where it's tough because they're trying to do something to get
Better
themselves to help.
Yeah.
And that's where it's hard because it has to be rigid though. Like those rules have to have. It's like with the hardship part about X amount of weeks on Centrelink and debts outstanding. It's there as a last resort, basically. So, it's complicated. It's never simple when it comes to super, but
No.
if they didn't change it as much, it would be easier. We'd all get our head around what it is. And some people have a really good grasp on it, but there's always complexities to it that they're not aware of because of the fact that it has got so many layers and books of legislation around it. Which keeps us busy.
It does. It does. Anything else you want to add to that, Ben? We have talked for 40 minutes on one topic, so I don't think we've got time for any more.
That's our threshold, I reckon.
Any other closing comments around super? What would you do if you're in charge? What are you doing with super?
I think less is more, and so just leaving it as is. I think that, and again, we could probably talk about this another time. I flagged it to you earlier. I think that they need to look at other mechanisms to get people into a house, and whether that's incentivise savings plans or investment plans, or that might be like a co-contribution we've had in super in the past, but make it a personal thing. So if someone wants to try and get themselves ahead and start saving money, that the government, under obviously there have to be rules and regulations. For every 1,000 they put in, they give them an extra $200 and incentivize them to improve their cash flow, save, build wealth, so that they can get ahead that way with little step ups like that, because they're still going to need time, so they're still going to have that deferred reward. The risk is if you give it too quick, which has happened in the past with first home buyer grants and things like that. It's exploded the property market because it's too quick, and it means that everyone gets cash quick, purchases quick, market goes up quick, and then that sets off the whole FOMO mindset. Whereas if you set it out over a period of time, let's just say 5 years, and that they can meet a couple of different parameters along that 5-year journey, they get a bonus at the end of it. I think that's what we need to look towards.
Yeah, well, you think about how we ideally like to see people investing, particularly young people saving. It's installments, small amounts regularly over a long period of time, so that they get into the habit of it being part of their cash flow. They see progressive results. They benefit from the fluctuations in the market. If you could align some sort of government incentive with that, again, the negative of that is that if more government incentives generally means the government's got to put their hand into their pocket and borrow, which ultimately we as taxpayers are going to pay. But again, like everything in life, there's a trade-off. There's a dichotomy, trying to find the optimum situation for everyone. It's not going to be perfect, is it?
Nothing's ever perfect, is it?
Yeah. All right. Good to chat, Ben. We'll see you next week.
JB.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you're keen to understand more about how financial advice could benefit you, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Burke Britton FP, or Google Burke Britton Financial Partners. Check out our client reviews, testimonials, and make a time to meet one of our certified financial planners by clicking Book Now on our website. Thanks for listening.
Any information contained in this podcast is of a general nature only. No account was taken as to the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. Therefore, before making any decision, listeners should consider the appropriateness of any information with regard to their particular objective, financial situation, needs, and seek independent advice from a licensed professional specific to their circumstances.
All right, hit it.
That translates to don't be a moron and act on what some random person says on a podcast. Take personal responsibility, do your homework, ask questions, and speak to an actual human that knows what they're talking about before you do anything. PB Financial Solutions Proprietary Limited, trading as Burke Britton Financial Partners, are authorised representatives of AMP Financial Planning Limited, AFS, licence number 232706.